Dear Greg, all my life my mother manipulated me and controlled me. She used praise and guilt and nagging to get me to do whatever she wanted. And for many years, it worked pretty well. But eventually, I got tired of it, and I began to avoid her. I didn't want anything to do with her manipulation. Then I married a beautiful, sweet woman who was just the opposite of my mother. It was great. For about a year. And then she began to change. She began to nag me all the time to do what she wanted. And if I didn't, she made me feel guilty. Now I feel like I'm married to my mother. How did this happen? I hated the way my mother treated me. So how could I possibly have ended up with someone just like her?
Imagine that as a young child, you were taught to play the violin, and you learned only classical music. You played solos, and in chamber groups, and in symphony orchestras, performing works by Mozart, Handel, Beethoven, Paganini. But eventually, when you graduated from high school, you became tired of playing and gave up the violin. You were tired of practicing and tired of being nagged about practicing, so you moved on to cars, girls, stuff like that. Years later, however, you're invited to a special kind of musical festival where the performances are all created by the people who attend the festival. The festival is held in a huge complex of buildings with many auditoriums, and in each one a different kind of music is being played. In one auditorium is a group of jazz musicians, in another a group of people playing the blues. Country western musicians fill the stage in another location, bluegrass in another, and in one auditorium you find a symphony orchestra playing a piece composed by Beethoven, a piece you have played before. And there's an open chair in the violin section with a fine violin and bow sitting on the chair. Of all the auditoriums and all the kinds of music being played, where would you choose to spend the festival? Even though you have previously grown tired of the violin years ago, you would almost certainly gravitate to the symphony orchestra. Sit down in the open chair in the violin section, pick up the violin and bow, and begin playing the piece you had once known. Why? Because you're familiar with that instrument and with that kind of music. We tend to do what we know, what we're familiar with, what we're comfortable with. You've done that same thing with your mother and wife. Even though part of you hates nagging, guilt, being manipulated, and being controlled, you are very familiar with that role of being manipulated and controlled. You know how to do that, whereas you really don't know how to behave in other ways. And you get a lot from filling that role. With your mother, for example, you got many things when you did what she wanted. First, praise. When you did what she wanted, she smiled at you and said nice things to you. That was a very strong inducement to do what she wanted. In the absence of real love, praise feels pretty darn good. Second, conditional approval. She accepted you when you did what she demanded from you. And to you, in the absence of real love, that conditional approval felt like love. You liked it a lot. Third, safety. When you did what she wanted, she didn't criticize you. She didn't attack you. You were safe, and that's a big deal. Fourth, you got a place in the world. Most people have no idea what their place in the world is. They don't know what their purpose is. They don't know their role. Without a role, we feel detached, unconnected, and alone. There's a huge comfort in knowing that we have a role. With that role, we feel connected to the people that help us fill that role. Even though your mother used you, when you let her do that, you felt connected to her. You felt useful. You filled a role. You had a place in the world. Now, it sounds kind of sick, and it is, but this need to have a place in the world is huge. In the next session, we'll talk about how you came to repeat all this with your wife.